The whispers started the moment I entered that courtroom. My own daughter, Catherine, sitting beside her husband, David, both dressed in their expensive tailored suits, actually laughing. Catherine caught David's eye and smirked, probably making some comment about the confused elderly woman who thought she could represent herself in court. If you're listening to this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment and let me know where you're from. You see, 8 months ago, my husband James passed away after 42 years of marriage, and he left me everything. His entire fortune, every stock portfolio, every piece of real estate, every investment account. Catherine had expected to inherit millions, naturally. But James's will was absolutely clear, crystal clear. Everything, every single asset, went to his devoted wife, Elizabeth Morgan, not $1 to our daughter. That's when Catherine decided I must be senile. How else could a homemaker, someone who'd spent decades raising children and managing a household, end up controlling a $73 million estate? She hired attorneys, filed paperwork claiming I'd somehow manipulated a dying man, forged signatures, committed fraud. The legal documents painted me as some kind of gold-digging wife who'd tricked her way into an inheritance she didn't deserve. I remember that Tuesday morning, sitting at my kitchen table, reading through those legal papers while my tea grew cold. My own daughter was suing me. Her mother, claiming elder abuse and fraud. She wanted the court to declare me mentally unfit, wanted James's will overturned, wanted what she believed was rightfully hers. The irony, it was almost amusing. Almost. Catherine had always seen me as just Mom, the woman who made her breakfast, drove her to piano lessons, volunteered at school functions, kept the house running while Daddy built his empire. She never asked about my life before marriage, never wondered why legal journals filled my bookshelves, never questioned why senior partners from major law firms occasionally sent me holiday cards. Mrs. Morgan, her attorney, Thomas Richardson, had said during our deposition, speaking very slowly, very deliberately, as if I were both deaf and simple-minded, "Can you explain to this court how a woman with no legal training, no business background, no college education came to possess such extensive knowledge of Mr. Morgan's complex financial affairs?" I'd smiled sweetly, very sweetly, and told him I'd always been good with numbers and details. Let him make whatever assumptions he wanted. Now, sitting in this courtroom, watching Catherine's confident expression, her assured posture, I almost felt sorry for what was about to happen. She thought she was so prepared, so clever. She had absolutely no idea that her simple housewife mother had been studying legal precedents since before she was born. The bailiff called everyone to order, and Judge Helen Crawford entered the courtroom. The moment she saw me, her steps faltered, just slightly. Our eyes met across that space, and I saw recognition flicker in her gaze. Just for a moment. Catherine noticed nothing, too busy conferring with her lawyer about their guaranteed victory against the incompetent old woman. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. Because the true story began the day James died, not the day we walked into that courtroom. I was holding his hand when he passed, just like I'd held it for 42 years of marriage. The doctors had given us a year, maybe 18 months, but the cancer only gave us 5 months. Wealth can't buy you more time, not when your body decides it's done. "Elizabeth," he'd whispered in those final hours, his voice barely audible. "They're going to come for you. They'll think you don't know anything, but I've made sure you're protected. Everything is yours, just like we planned, just like we discussed all those years." I'd kissed his forehead, held his hand tighter, and promised him I'd be fine. James knew me better than anyone in this world, including our daughter, who thought she knew me so well. The reading of the will happened 3 weeks later in James's attorney's office downtown. Catherine arrived dressed entirely in black, tissues clutched in her hand, playing the role of grieving daughter perfectly. David stood beside her. I could see it in his eyes. Already calculating their inheritance, already planning how to spend it. "To my beloved wife, Elizabeth Morgan," the lawyer read, his voice formal and clear, "I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, bank accounts, business holdings, and assets, valued at approximately $73 million. The silence in that room. You could have heard a pin drop. Catherine's tissue box slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a thud. That's impossible," she said, her voice shaking, rising in pitch. "Daddy promised me the estate in Connecticut. He said I'd inherit the company's shares, he promised." "The will is quite clear, Mrs. Harrison," the lawyer continued, his tone neutral. Your father left you a collection of family photographs and his vintage watch collection. To your husband, David, he left his golf equipment. I watched my daughter's face transform, from shock to disbelief to pure fury, all in the span of maybe 10 seconds. This isn't right. Her voice was harder now, sharper. Mom doesn't know the first thing about managing money, about running businesses. She'll lose everything within 6 months, maybe a year at most. David's voice was even harder, more aggressive. We need to examine those documents immediately. This has to be some kind of error, some kind of mistake. But there was no mistake, no error. James had been planning this for years, carefully, meticulously, updating his will every time Catherine revealed her true character. Like when she borrowed $35,000 for their kitchen remodel and never mentioned paying it back, or when she mocked my pot roast at David's company dinner, calling it peasant food in front of his boss and colleagues. James saw how they treated me, how they took me for granted, dismissed me, underestimated me. He knew they saw me as weak, incapable, unworthy of respect or consideration. After leaving the lawyer's office, Catherine and David followed me home. They sat in my living room, the same room where I'd helped Catherine with algebra homework, where we'd celebrated her college acceptance, where I'd comforted her through her first heartbreak. "Mom, be reasonable," Catherine said, her voice suddenly honey-sweet, dripping with false concern. "You can't possibly manage all this money alone. You've never handled finances. Why don't you let David help you? He's excellent with investments and business decisions." David nodded eagerly, leaning forward. "We could establish a trust, set up proper management, make sure everything's handled correctly, professionally. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it, wouldn't have to stress." I poured myself tea, my hands perfectly steady. "I appreciate your concern, truly, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Are you, though?" Catherine's sweet mask slipped just slightly, just enough to see underneath. "Mom, you've never even balanced a checkbook in your life. Daddy handled everything, every bill, every investment, every decision." That's when I understood, really understood, what they were planning, what they intended to do. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a young process server who looked genuinely embarrassed to be serving legal documents to someone's grandmother. Catherine hadn't wasted any time, hadn't hesitated. I read through the entire petition while my coffee grew cold in its cup. According to these documents, these official legal documents, I was suffering from severe dementia, had been manipulated by unnamed parties into forging my husband's will, and posed a genuine danger to myself through my irrational financial decisions. The evidence they'd compiled was, I'll admit, almost impressive in its creativity, in its thoroughness. They'd documented the time I got lost driving to Catherine's house last spring, clearly a sign of severe cognitive decline, not just unfamiliar roads and construction detours. They'd noted my inability to operate modern technology, because I'd asked Catherine's teenage son to help me set up a streaming service. Most damaging, most carefully constructed, was David's sworn statement, claiming I'd become increasingly paranoid and secretive about finances, refusing their well-meaning, helpful guidance in managing James's estate. My phone rang within 30 minutes of receiving those papers. Catherine's number flashed on the screen. "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to find out this way," she said, not sounding sorry at all, not even a little bit. "We tried to talk to you reasonably, rationally, but you're just not capable of handling this kind of responsibility." "I see," I said calmly, sipping my now cold coffee. "The good news is, once the court declares you incompetent, David and I can manage everything properly. You'll have a comfortable allowance, enough for your needs, your expenses, and you won't have to worry about all those complicated investments and business decisions anymore." I watched a blue jay land on my bird feeder outside the window, remembering how James used to say blue jays meant change was coming, transformation. "And where exactly would I live during this arrangement?" I asked. There was a pause, just a brief hesitation. "Well, the Connecticut estate would be perfect for you. It's smaller, more manageable, easier to maintain. David and I would take the main residence, of course, since we have more family obligations, more social responsibilities." "Of course they would." "Catherine, do you genuinely believe I'm mentally incompetent?" I asked. "Mom, it's not about belief. It's about reality, about facts. You married Daddy when you were 26 and never had a career, never worked outside the home. You don't understand business or law or financial management. This inheritance is simply too much for someone with your background. background, as if 42 years of marriage and motherhood had somehow erased everything I'd been before, everything I'd accomplished. "I understand you've hired Thomas Richardson to represent you," I said quietly. "How did you—" She caught herself. "See, this is exactly what I mean. You're becoming paranoid, suspicious. It's not healthy, Mom." After we hung up, I sat in James's study for a long time, surrounded by his books and awards and photographs. On his desk was a picture from our wedding day. Me in my simple cream-colored dress, him looking at me like I held all the world's secrets. James knew this day would come. He tried to warn me. He knew Catherine and David saw me as weak, saw our marriage as a transaction where I'd contributed nothing of real value. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the envelope James had given me 3 years ago, tucked away, waiting. "When they come for you," he'd said, holding my hand, looking into my eyes. "And Elizabeth, they will come for you eventually. Open this." Inside was a business card and a note in James's distinctive handwriting. "Elizabeth, call Helen Crawford. She remembers you. She remembers everything." Helen Crawford, Superior Court Judge. The name seemed familiar, distantly familiar, but I couldn't quite place it, couldn't quite remember why. I had no idea what was coming next. No idea at all. I decided to visit Catherine one more time before this legal battle began in earnest. Maybe, just maybe, I could make her understand what she was doing, what she was destroying. Their house was everything. Mine wasn't. Modern, cold, sterile, impressive in its calculated perfection. Catherine had redecorated again since James's funeral, I noticed immediately. New furniture, new artwork, all paid for with money they'd borrowed from us over the years. Money they'd never mentioned repaying. "Mom, what a surprise," Catherine said when she opened the door, though her tone suggested it wasn't a pleasant one. "Wasn't welcome." "Is David home?" I asked. "He's at the office, working late." Good, I thought. This conversation needed to happen between mother and daughter. Just the two of us. I sat in their pristine living room, accepting the coffee she offered more out of habit than any real desire to drink it. "Catherine, we need to talk about this lawsuit, about what you're doing." "There's nothing to discuss, Mom. You're unwell. Even if you can't see it yourself, this legal action is for your own protection, for your own good." "I'm not unwell, sweetheart. I'm grieving. I'm adjusting to life without your father, but I'm not incompetent." She sat across from me, her expression a careful mixture of pity and frustration. Like I was a child who couldn't understand simple concepts. "Mom, yesterday you called me asking how to transfer money between accounts. Last week you couldn't figure out how to pay utilities online. These aren't normal aging issues. These are signs of cognitive decline." I studied my daughter's face carefully, seeing James's determined jaw, my own green eyes staring back at me. When had she become so calculating, so cold? "Catherine, what if I told you I've been pretending?" She blinked, genuinely confused. "Pretending what?" "Pretending to be helpless. Pretending to need help with things I understand perfectly well." For just a moment, just one brief moment. Uncertainty flickered across her features. Then she shook her head dismissively. "Mom, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you pretend to be confused? Why would anyone do that?" "Because people treat you very differently when they think you're weak," I said softly. "They tell you things, reveal things. They wouldn't tell someone they considered a threat, someone they respected." Catherine's laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "A threat? You? Mom, you're 67 years old. You haven't worked outside the home in 42 years. What kind of threat could you possibly be to anyone?" I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt, picking up my purse. "The kind you're about to discover, Catherine. What's that supposed to mean?" Her voice had an edge now, uncertainty creeping in. I paused at their front door, my hand on the brass handle James had admired when we'd helped them purchase this house, when we'd paid their down payment. "It means, Catherine, that you and David have made a very serious miscalculation about who you're dealing with, about who I really am. Mom, you're scaring me now. This paranoid talk, these veiled threats, this is exactly why we filed the petition. You're not well." I turned back to her one final time. "I love you, Catherine. I always will, no matter what happens, but the first won't let you or anyone else steal what your father spent his entire life building, what he trusted me to protect." Driving home through the evening traffic, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, decades maybe. Not fear, not sadness, but anticipation, pure anticipation. Catherine thought she was hunting a rabbit, cornering something weak and helpless. She was about to discover she'd trapped a wolf instead. That evening, I made the phone call I'd been postponing. The number on Helen Crawford's business card rang exactly twice before a professional voice answered. Judge Crawford's chambers. This is Elizabeth Morgan. I'd like to speak with Helen about a case coming before her court. There was a pause, a long pause. Elizabeth Morgan, as in Elizabeth Thompson Morgan? Yes, please hold. Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Then, Elizabeth? My God, is it really you? 35 years of memories came flooding back all at once. Helen, it's really me. Elizabeth Thompson. I should have realized when I saw the name on the docket. Morgan versus Morgan. Your daughter is suing you? I could hear genuine disbelief in her voice, shock. Helen Crawford had been Helen Martinez when we were in law school together at Columbia. We'd studied together, competed together, pushed each other to be better, graduated in the same class of 1984. She thinks I'm an incompetent old woman who stumbled into a fortune by accident, I said, unable to keep the sadness from my voice. She has no idea who I used to be, who I actually am. Helen's laugh was exactly the same as it had been 40 years ago. Warm, genuine. Elizabeth the Steamroller Thompson, incompetent. That's absolutely rich. Do you remember the Morrison case? You destroyed 4 expert witnesses in one afternoon. It was legendary. I did remember. It had been my biggest case before I retired, before I met James, before I became just mom. Helen, I need to ask you something important. Can you ethically hear this case given our history? We were colleagues, not close personal friends, and it's been, 35 years since we've actually spoken? I can hear the case. She paused. But Elizabeth, if you're planning what I think you're planning, tell me you're getting proper representation. I'm not planning anything except defending myself against false accusations, I said carefully. With an attorney, I hope. I looked at James's photograph on my mantel, his smile, his confidence in me. I'll represent myself. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Elizabeth, you've been out of practice for nearly 4 decades. Law has changed significantly. Procedures, precedents, technology. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? I've kept my license active. I've been reading case law, following changes in legal procedure and precedent. Old habits die hard, Helen. Your daughter's attorney is Thomas Richardson. He's very good, very experienced in elder law and competency cases. I know, I said. I'd been researching him extensively since receiving the lawsuit. He's won 87% of his competency cases. He specializes in families seeking to declare elderly relatives incompetent to gain control of their assets. You realize what you're walking into, the scrutiny, the pressure. I stood and walked to my study, surrounded by the law books I'd never been able to part with, the case studies I'd annotated over the years, the legal journals I still subscribed to. Helen, do you remember what Professor Morrison used to say in trial strategy? Never let them see you coming, she said softly. Exactly. After we hung up, I spent the entire evening reviewing my old files. Cases I'd won, strategies I'd employed, the methodical preparation that had made me one of the most successful trial attorneys on the East Coast before I walked away. Catherine thought she was dealing with a helpless widow, a confused old woman. Tomorrow she'd discover she was facing Elizabeth Thompson, the woman who'd never lost a case in 17 years of practice, the woman who'd voluntarily walked away from law to raise her daughter, only to have that same daughter try to destroy her. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the familiar process of building a defense coming back like muscle memory, like breathing. Catherine's entire case relied on one fundamental assumption, that I was mentally incompetent. But competency isn't just about age or confusion or asking for help. It's about understanding the nature and consequences of your decisions. And I understood exactly what I was doing, exactly what was at stake. Richardson had made one crucial error in his petition, one glaring mistake. He'd painted me as a victim of manipulation, suggesting unnamed parties had influenced me to forge James's will. But James's will had been witnessed by 3 independent parties and notarized. The signatures had already been verified by certified handwriting experts. So where was this alleged forgery? Where was the evidence? I smiled, making another note on my legal pad. Richardson was fishing, hoping I'd panic and accept a settlement. He was counting on me being overwhelmed by legal procedures, frightened into giving up, willing to compromise. Tomorrow would change everything. The morning of our first court appearance, I dressed very carefully, very deliberately. Not in the designer suits Catherine expected, not in anything impressive. I wore my old navy dress with sensible shoes and carried my worn leather handbag. Let them think exactly what they wanted to think. Catherine and David arrived at the courthouse looking confident, powerful. Richardson had clearly assured them this would be a simple hearing, just a formality before the competency evaluation, before their inevitable victory. I sat alone at the defendant's table. No attorney beside me, no briefcase full of documents, no legal team. Just an old woman with a handbag. Exactly what they expected to see, exactly what they'd prepared for. Judge Crawford entered, and I watched Catherine's face carefully for any sign of recognition. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Helen had changed over the years naturally. Her dark hair now silver, her face more lined, but her sharp brown eyes were exactly the same, still missed nothing. "Your Honor," Richardson began, standing with practiced authority and confidence. "This is a straightforward case of financial elder abuse and potential fraud. Mrs. Morgan, the defendant, has been left a substantial inheritance under highly questionable circumstances. We believe the evidence will show she lacks the mental capacity to have understood or properly executed estate planning documents." I listened carefully as he painted his picture of me, confused, vulnerable, easily manipulated, dangerously incompetent. According to Richardson's narrative, I'd somehow forged my own husband's will, despite having no legal knowledge or understanding of estate law whatsoever. The plaintiff requests an immediate competency evaluation and temporary conservatorship to protect Mrs. Morgan's substantial assets from further mismanagement and potential exploitation. Judge Crawford looked directly at me. "Mrs. Morgan, you're representing yourself in this matter?" I stood slowly, carefully, playing the part they expected perfectly. "Yes, Your Honor, I couldn't afford an attorney." Catherine actually smirked at that, actually smiled. David squeezed her hand, looking pleased. "Do you understand the nature of these proceedings, Mrs. Morgan?" "I believe so, Your Honor. My daughter thinks I'm not smart enough to manage money, not capable." Richardson objected immediately. "Your Honor, this grossly oversimplifies serious allegations of mental incompetence and potential fraud." Sustained. "Mrs. Morgan, do you understand that the court is being asked to determine whether you have the mental capacity to manage your financial affairs independently?" "Yes, Your Honor, I understand that. And do you wish to contest these allegations?" I looked directly at Catherine for the first time that day. Really looked at her. "Yes, Your Honor, I absolutely do." Judge Crawford made some notes. "Mr. Richardson, I've reviewed your petition thoroughly. You're alleging that Mrs. Morgan forged her deceased husband's will? Not exactly forged, Your Honor, but was manipulated by unknown parties into believing she was entitled to an inheritance that should rightfully go to the children, to the next generation." "I see. And you have concrete evidence of this manipulation?" Richardson hesitated, just slightly. "We believe the evidence will emerge during the comprehensive competency evaluation, Your Honor." I stood again, slowly. "Your Honor, may I ask a question?" "Helen," Judge Crawford nodded slightly. "You may, Mr. Richardson, you claim I was manipulated into forging my husband's will, but the will was properly witnessed by 3 independent parties, professionally notarized, and filed correctly. Are you suggesting the witnesses and notary were also manipulated somehow?" Richardson looked annoyed at the interruption, at being questioned. "Your Honor, Mrs. Morgan clearly lacks the legal knowledge to understand the complexities of this case, the nuances involved." "Actually," I said quietly, calmly, "I understand perfectly. You're hoping the court will declare me incompetent based primarily on my age and gender, without any actual concrete evidence of mental incapacity or fraud. Isn't that right, Mr. Richardson?" The courtroom went very quiet, completely silent. Catherine was staring at me with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open. David looked confused, uncertain. Furthermore, I continued, my voice stronger now. "Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 190 billions requires clear and convincing evidence of incapacity. You've provided character testimony and speculation, but no medical evidence, no psychological evaluation, no concrete proof of any kind." Richardson was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Morgan is clearly being coached by someone. This knowledge didn't come from her." Judge Crawford raised an eyebrow. By whom, Mr. Richardson? She's representing herself. There's no one else at her table. That's when I decided to stop pretending, to stop playing the role. I straightened my shoulders and let 35 years of careful pretense fall away like an old coat I didn't need anymore. Your Honor, I'd like to present my credentials to the court. I reached into my handbag, my old worn handbag, and pulled out my Massachusetts Bar Association card, current and valid. Elizabeth Thompson Morgan, member of the Massachusetts Bar since 1984. License number 923,847. The silence in that courtroom was absolutely deafening. Complete. Catherine's mouth fell open completely. David grabbed her arm, whispering frantically, urgently. Richardson looked like someone had physically slapped him. Judge Crawford examined my credentials with a carefully neutral expression, professional detachment. Mrs. Morgan, why didn't you mention your legal background earlier in these proceedings? Because, Your Honor, I wanted to see exactly what accusations Mr. Richardson would make against someone he assumed was legally ignorant, someone he believed couldn't defend herself. I turned to face Richardson directly, looking him straight in the eye. You've spent the last 30 minutes arguing that I lack the mental capacity to understand simple financial matters, yet you never bothered to research my background, my history, my qualifications, not even basic due diligence. Richardson found his voice, though it was shakier now. Your Honor, this changes nothing. Mrs. Morgan hasn't practiced law in decades. She's clearly been manipulated by someone, coached somehow. By whom? I asked simply. My dead husband. You keep mentioning these mysterious manipulators, these unnamed parties, but you've never identified a single one. Not one name. I walked to the center of the courtroom slowly, feeling the familiar confidence returning, flooding back. Your Honor, I practiced criminal defense law for 17 years. I specialized in complex fraud cases, white-collar crime, estate disputes. I understand estate planning, trust law, and financial management better than most people in this room, certainly better than my daughter and son-in-law apparently understand it. Catherine finally spoke, her voice shaky, uncertain. Mom, you never told me you were a lawyer. You never said anything. I looked at my daughter with a mixture of deep sadness and disappointment. You never asked, Catherine. In 42 years, not once did you ask about my life before I married your father. Not once. Richardson was scrambling, now flipping through papers frantically. Your Honor, regardless of Mrs. Morgan's past career, the evidence clearly shows recent signs of mental decline, of current incompetence. What evidence? I challenged. That I asked my grandson to help me with a streaming service? That I got lost driving to Catherine's house during major road construction? Mr. Richardson, if technical difficulties and navigation problems indicate dementia, half the population over 50 should be declared incompetent immediately. Judge Crawford leaned forward. Mr. Richardson, do you have any actual medical evidence of mental incapacity? Any evaluations, any professional assessments? We request a full neurological evaluation, Your Honor, based on what specific medical grounds? What symptoms? Richardson shuffled his papers, clearly completely unprepared for this turn of events. Based on behavioral observations from family members, Your Honor, I almost laughed. Almost. Your Honor, my daughter observed me asking for help with tasks I was perfectly capable of handling myself. I wanted to see how they'd treat someone they perceived as helpless, as vulnerable. I wanted to understand their true intentions. And what did you discover, Mrs. Morgan? I looked directly at Catherine, seeing the hurt and confusion in her eyes, the dawning realization. I discovered that my own daughter views me as an obstacle to her inheritance, not as a person deserving of basic respect or dignity. Richardson made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, Mrs. Morgan clearly orchestrated this entire scenario to make her daughter appear greedy, to manipulate this court. This demonstrates severe personality dysfunction, possible narcissistic tendencies. Judge Crawford's expression grew stern, cold. Mr. Morrison, are you now suggesting that Mrs. Morgan manipulated your client into filing a frivolous lawsuit against her? The trap was closing, and Richardson was walking right into it, completely blind. During the recess, I watched Catherine and David huddled with Richardson in the hallway through the glass doors. Catherine kept glancing at me, her face showing shock, confusion, maybe even fear. David was pacing frantically, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice raised. I caught fragments of his conversation drifting through the partially open door. Much more complicated than we thought, and need to completely reassess our position. They'd built their entire case, their entire strategy, on the fundamental assumption that I was a simple housewife who'd somehow stumbled into wealth. Now they were scrambling desperately to understand who they were really dealing with, what they'd actually walked into. Richardson approached me during the break, his earlier confidence completely replaced by cautious, wary respect. Mrs. Morgan, perhaps we could discuss a possible settlement? A reasonable resolution? What kind of settlement, Mr. Richardson? Your daughter is willing to withdraw the competency petition in exchange for a more equitable distribution of the estate, a fair division. I almost smiled. Almost. You mean Catherine wants her inheritance after all, despite claiming I'm mentally incompetent? Mrs. Morgan, surely you understand your daughter's position. She naturally expected to inherit something significant from her father. It's only reasonable. Mr. Richardson, my daughter inherited something invaluable from her father. A loving family, an excellent education, every opportunity to succeed in life. The fact that she chose to take those gifts for granted, to squander opportunities, doesn't automatically entitle her to his money. But $73 million is a substantial sum for one person to manage alone. At your age. Are you questioning my mental capacity again, Mr. Richardson? I asked quietly. Because I should warn you. That approach didn't work out particularly well for you in there. Richardson's professional mask slipped slightly, and I saw genuine worry underneath. Mrs. Morgan, I'll be completely frank with you. My clients are seriously reconsidering their approach, their strategy. They'd strongly prefer to resolve this matter privately, quietly. I'm sure they would, I said, gathering my purse. But we're far past the point of private resolution now. Your clients made this public when they filed papers claiming I was mentally incompetent, when they accused me of fraud and elder abuse. Now they can face the full consequences of their accusations. In open court. When court reconvened, Richardson immediately requested a continuance to reassess the evidence, to regroup. Judge Crawford denied the request firmly. Mr. Richardson, you filed this petition claiming urgency due to Mrs. Morgan's alleged deteriorating mental state. You argued she posed an immediate danger to herself and her assets. You can't now claim you need more time to build your case properly. Catherine took the stand as their primary witness, and I watched my daughter struggle visibly, trying desperately to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with the woman who'd just completely outmaneuvered her expensive attorney. Mrs. Harrison, Richardson began, his voice less certain now. Please describe your mother's behavior following your father's death. Catherine's voice was uncertain, shaky. She seemed confused about financial matters. She asked me questions about banking, about investment accounts, about managing money. Did these questions concern you at the time? At the time, yes. But now I'm wondering if... She trailed off, looking directly at me with something like fear in her eyes. If what, Mrs. Harrison? If she was testing me somehow, testing all of us. Richardson looked like he wanted to object to his own witness's testimony. Mrs. Harrison, do you still believe your mother lacks the capacity to manage her financial affairs? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, a very long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible, almost a whisper. I don't know anymore. I honestly don't know. The foundation of their entire case was crumbling in real time, disintegrating right in front of everyone. That evening, Catherine called me at home. Her voice was completely different. Smaller, younger, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort. Mom, we need to talk, please. I'm listening, Catherine. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing shakily. Why didn't you ever tell me you were a lawyer? Why didn't you tell me about your career, your accomplishments? I sat in James's study, surrounded by the law books I'd never had the heart to donate or pack away. Because when you were born, Catherine, you became more important than any career. I wanted to be your mother, not your lawyer, not your colleague, just your mom. But you gave up everything for me, your career, your independence, your identity. No, sweetheart, I said softly, I chose you. There's a fundamental difference between giving up something and choosing something better. Catherine was crying now. I could hear it in her voice, in her breathing. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I thought Michael said you didn't understand money, that you'd lose everything Dad worked for, that we needed to protect the estate. And you believed him because you wanted to believe him, I said quietly. It was easier, more comfortable, to think I was incompetent than to consider that your father made a conscious, deliberate choice. Why didn't Dad leave me anything? What did I do wrong? The pain in her voice broke my heart, shattered it, but she needed to hear the truth, needed to understand. Catherine, your father loved you deeply, completely, but he also saw very clearly how you and David treated money, treated resources. You borrowed without paying back, spent without considering consequences or sustainability. He knew that giving you millions immediately would only enable that behavior, would make it worse. So he punished me. By giving it all to you, he trusted me to make the right decisions about our family's future, including difficult decisions about you and David. There was a long pause. What does that mean exactly? It means the money was never the point, Catherine. The point was teaching you that love isn't measured in dollars, and respect isn't optional just because someone appears vulnerable or weak. Mom, can we fix this? Can we drop the lawsuit and start over, please? I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly very tired, very old. Catherine, tomorrow morning, David is going to ask you to continue fighting. He's going to convince you that I manipulated this whole situation, that I made you look foolish on purpose, that I'm the villain here. How do you know that? Because I've been watching him carefully for 8 years of marriage to my daughter. David sees dollar signs and assets, not family, not relationships. The question is, what are you going to choose, him or the truth? The line went quiet except for Catherine's soft crying, her ragged breathing. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. But love isn't enough anymore. We need respect, honesty, and trust. Until you're ready to give me those things, genuinely ready, we can't move forward together. After I hung up, I wondered if I'd been too harsh, too cold. But 42 years of enabling Catherine's sense of entitlement had led us directly to this courtroom confrontation, this breaking point. Sometimes love meant setting firm boundaries, even when it hurt terribly, even when it broke your heart. The next morning brought a genuine surprise. Instead of Catherine and David arriving together as expected, Catherine came alone. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept at all, like she'd been crying for hours. David arrived 20 minutes later with a different lawyer. Someone younger, more aggressive, more expensive looking. He'd escalated instead of backing down, doubled down on the attack. The new attorney, Marcus Chen, immediately requested a sidebar with Judge Crawford. I couldn't hear the whispered conversation, but Richardson looked distinctly uncomfortable, and Chen was gesticulating wildly, aggressively. When they returned, Chen had a completely new strategy, a different approach. Your Honor, we're amending our petition substantially. We now allege that Mrs. Morgan deliberately deceived her family about her mental state to manipulate them into filing this lawsuit, proving she's mentally unfit to manage a substantial estate responsibly. It was actually clever in a twisted, convoluted way. Instead of claiming I was incompetent, they were now claiming I was too manipulative, too cunning, that my behavior itself demonstrated unfitness. Judge Crawford looked openly skeptical. Mr. Chen, you're arguing that Mrs. Morgan is simultaneously mentally unfit and mentally cunning enough to orchestrate an elaborate legal trap? These positions seem contradictory. We're arguing that her behavior demonstrates a concerning, pathological disconnect from normal reality and healthy family relationships, Your Honor. Your Honor, I stood up calmly. May I respond to this creative new theory? Proceed, Mrs. Morgan. Mr. Chen seems to be arguing that defending myself competently against false accusations somehow proves I'm unfit to defend myself. This is circular logic at its absolute finest. Quite impressive, actually. Chen shot back quickly. Mrs. Morgan deliberately misled her family about her capabilities, then cynically used their natural concern against them. This demonstrates severe personality dysfunction. Natural concern? I let my voice carry clearly across the courtroom. Mr. Chen, my daughter and son-in-law didn't express concern for my well-being, my health, my happiness. They expressed concern for their inheritance, for their financial future. There's a very significant difference. I turned to face Catherine, directly, seeing her wince at my words, seeing the tears. If Catherine had called and said, Mom, I'm worried about you. Can we schedule a medical checkup? That would be concern, genuine care. If she'd said, "Mom, let me help you organize your finances," that would be support, that would be family. Instead, she filed legal papers claiming I was mentally incompetent without ever talking to my doctor, my friends, or anyone else who interacts with me regularly. Judge Crawford nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Chen, do you have any medical evidence whatsoever supporting claims of mental unfitness or personality dysfunction?" "We have extensive family testimony about deeply concerning behaviors, Your Honor. Behaviors that Mrs. Morgan has now explained as deliberate, careful tests of her family's character and intentions." Chen was losing ground rapidly, visibly. "Your Honor, Mrs. Morgan's own testimony proves she's manipulative and fundamentally deceptive. These are not qualities of someone fit to manage $73 million. Or qualities of someone intelligent and appropriately cautious," Judge Crawford replied dryly. I could see the exact moment Chen realized his new strategy was backfiring spectacularly. Catherine was staring at the floor, tears running down her face. David's face was red with anger, with barely controlled rage. That's when everything truly changed. When I played my final card. "Your Honor," I said, standing slowly, deliberately, "I'd like to present additional evidence to the court at this time." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick manila folder I'd been saving carefully for exactly this moment. "These are comprehensive financial records showing every penny Catherine and David have borrowed from my husband and me over the past 8 years. Chen jumped up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery. We weren't provided copies." "Mr. Chen," Judge Crawford said with barely concealed amusement, "Mrs. Morgan is representing herself as a pro se litigant. The rules of evidence are somewhat relaxed for self-represented parties, especially when responding to amended petitions filed literally this morning, without notice." I handed copies to the court clerk, who distributed them. "Your Honor, these records show a clear pattern of financial dependence totaling over $240,000. None of it, not a single dollar, was ever repaid or even discussed." Catherine's face went completely white, drained of all color. David grabbed her arm roughly, whispering urgently, desperately. "Furthermore," I continued calmly, "I have here a digital recording of a conversation between Catherine and David from 6 weeks ago, discussing their specific plans to have me declared incompetent so they could, quote, finally get control of Mom's money." The courtroom absolutely erupted. Chen was shouting objections, his voice rising. David was on his feet, face purple. Catherine looked like she might physically collapse. Judge Crawford banged her gavel hard repeatedly. "Order! Order in this court. Mr. Chen, I'll hear your objection now. Your Honor, this recording was obtained without proper consent. It's completely inadmissible under privacy laws." I smiled, couldn't help myself. "Actually, Mr. Chen, Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recordings. Since this conversation took place in my home, with my knowledge and explicit consent, it's perfectly admissible under state law." "Your Honor," Chen tried desperately, frantically, "this is clearly a setup, an entrapment." "Yes," I agreed readily, "it absolutely was. I set up a situation where my daughter and son-in-law would reveal their true motivations, their actual intentions. Just like I set up their assumptions about my mental capacity to reveal their prejudices and their greed." Judge Crawford leaned forward intently. "Mrs. Morgan, did you plan this entire scenario from the beginning?" "Your Honor, I knew Catherine and David would eventually challenge my inheritance. My husband warned me explicitly they would. So yes, I prepared carefully for this strong possibility. I documented everything, recorded conversations, kept meticulous records." I looked directly at Catherine, who was crying openly now, mascara running down her face. "I hoped desperately I was wrong about you, sweetheart. I hoped you'd prove me wrong. Prove your father wrong. But you didn't." Judge Crawford reviewed the financial records methodically, carefully, page by page. Then she listened to key portions of the recording, her expression growing progressively more stern, more disapproving. When she finally finished, she removed her reading glasses slowly and looked directly at David and Catherine. "Mr. Chen, I'm denying your amended petition in its entirety. Mrs. Morgan has demonstrated exceptional mental acuity, impressive legal knowledge, and careful, methodical planning. More importantly, she's exposed the true motivation behind this entire lawsuit with documented evidence." She turned her full attention to Catherine and David, her voice cold and sharp. "Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Harrison, This court finds that you filed this petition not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Morgan's welfare or well-being, but in a calculated attempt to gain control of assets you believe you're entitled to. This constitutes harassment and potentially actionable fraud." David jumped to his feet, his face red, his voice loud. "Your Honor, we were genuinely concerned about Mrs. Morgan's mental state. This is completely unfair." Judge Crawford's expression could have frozen water solid. "Mr. Harrison, I've just listened to a recording of you saying, and I quote directly, 'Once the old woman is declared incompetent, we can finally live the lifestyle we actually deserve.' Would you like to explain how that statement demonstrates genuine concern for her well-being?" The courtroom was absolutely silent, completely still. You could have heard a pin drop. "Mrs. Morgan," Judge Crawford continued, her voice warming slightly, "not only are you demonstrably competent to manage your affairs, you're one of the most competent, most capable individuals I've encountered in this courtroom. This case is dismissed with prejudice." She banged her gavel once, firmly. Final. As Catherine and David left with their lawyers, both looking defeated and angry, Catherine turned back one final time. Our eyes met across the courtroom. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of everything. "I know you are, sweetheart. But sorry isn't enough anymore. Not nearly enough." The courthouse steps were bathed in afternoon sunlight as I emerged. The air felt different somehow, lighter, clearer. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing, just being. A hand touched my shoulder gently. Helen Crawford, now out of her judge's robes, wearing a simple gray suit. "Elizabeth, that was remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. I learned from the best," I said, managing a small smile. "You always were the best, Elizabeth. Better than me, better than most of the attorneys I see in my courtroom." She paused. "What will you do now?" I looked out at the city. The same city where I'd practiced law decades ago, where I'd built a reputation, where I'd walked away from everything. "I don't know yet," I admitted honestly, "but I think I'm ready to stop hiding who I am, stop pretending to be less than I am." Helen smiled warmly. "Good. The world needs more women who refuse to diminish themselves, who refuse to be underestimated." We exchanged contact information, real contact information this time, with promises to actually stay in touch, to not let another 35 years disappear. The days following the trial were strange, surreal. The local legal community was buzzing with news of the case. Elizabeth Thompson Morgan, legendary trial attorney from the 80s, had emerged from retirement to defend herself in spectacular fashion. I received calls from old colleagues, former adversaries, law professors I hadn't spoken to in decades. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Would I consider coming back to practice? Would I take on clients again? I didn't know the answer. Not yet. Catherine called exactly 1 week after the trial. Her voice was different, more mature somehow, more thoughtful. "Mom, can we meet? Just you and me? No David, no lawyers, just us." We met at a small cafe near the harbor. Neutral territory. Catherine arrived early, I noticed. She looked thinner, tired, older somehow. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly as I sat down. "Of course." For a long moment, neither of us spoke, just two women sitting across from each other, mother and daughter, strangers who used to be close. "I filed for divorce yesterday," Catherine said finally, her voice steady but sad. From David, I wasn't entirely surprised, but I kept my expression neutral. "How are you feeling about that?" Terrified, relieved, ashamed. She looked down at her hands. "The recording you played in court, hearing David talk about you that way, about us that way. I couldn't unhear it, couldn't pretend anymore. I'm sorry you had to hear that, but I'm glad you did." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "How did you know? How did you know he was like that?" "Because I watched, Catherine. For years I watched how he treated people he considered beneath him. Waiters, shop clerks, my friends. I watched how he talked about money, about success, about what he deserved. Your father saw it too. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you warn me?" I reached across the table and took her hand gently. "Would you have listened? At 23, madly in love, convinced you knew better than your old-fashioned parents?" She shook her head slowly, sadly. "No, I wouldn't have. Some lessons we have to learn ourselves, sweetheart, no matter how much it hurts." We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee, watching boats in the harbor. "I got a job," Catherine said eventually. "Nothing impressive. Administrative assistant at a marketing firm. But it's mine. I'm earning my own money for the first time in, God, in 8 years." I felt pride surge through me. Genuine, deep pride. "That's wonderful, Catherine. Truly. I'm selling the house, the one you and Dad helped us buy. I'm moving to a small apartment, starting over completely." She paused. "I'm also starting therapy, trying to understand how I became someone who would sue her own mother. That takes courage," I said softly. "Real courage. Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but is there any chance we can eventually rebuild our relationship? Not now, I know it's too soon, but someday?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility, self-awareness, genuine remorse. "Catherine, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment, even in that courtroom. But love without respect, without trust. It's not enough to build a relationship on, I understand. But if you're willing to do the work, real work, on yourself, on understanding what happened, on becoming someone who values people over money, then yes, someday we can rebuild. Slowly, carefully. But we can try." Catherine's tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you, Mom." I squeezed her hand. "Thank your father. He's the one who loved you enough to set boundaries, to teach hard lessons even after he was gone." 3 months later, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I opened a small law practice specializing in elder law and estate protection. Not to make money, I had more than enough money, but to help other people like me, older adults being underestimated, manipulated, taken advantage of by family members or predatory advisors. My first client was a 72-year-old man whose children were trying to declare him incompetent so they could sell his house and move him to a nursing home. Within 2 weeks, I'd demolished their case completely. Turned out he was sharper than his own attorneys. Word spread quickly. Soon I had more clients than I could handle. All pro bono, all cases where someone needed a fighter in their corner. Helen Crawford started referring cases to me. Judges I'd never met sent people my way. The legal community embraced me like I'd never left. One afternoon, about 6 months after the trial, I was in my office reviewing a case when my assistant buzzed me. "Mrs. Morgan, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "Who is it?" "She says she's your daughter." My heart skipped, just slightly. "Send her in." Catherine entered hesitantly, carefully. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her, healthier, more confident somehow. She was wearing a simple professional dress, carrying a modest purse. "I'm sorry to interrupt your work," she said. "You're never an interruption, Catherine. Sit down." She sat across from my desk, looking around at the law books, the case files, the framed diplomas I'd finally hung on the wall. "This is amazing, Mom, what you're doing here. It's really amazing." "Thank you, sweetheart." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to tell you in person. I've been accepted to a paralegal certification program. I start next month." Pride flooded through me, warm and genuine. "Catherine, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. I know I'll never be the attorney you are. She laughed nervously. "But I want to work in law, want to help people. Maybe eventually I can work with you? Not now. I know I have a lot to prove. But someday?" I came around the desk and pulled my daughter into a hug. A real hug, for the first time in what felt like years. "You don't have to be me, Catherine. You just have to be the best version of yourself. Honest, hardworking, compassionate. That's all anyone can ask." "I'm still in therapy," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Working through a lot of things. About money, about self-worth, about family." "Good. That's good." When we pulled apart, both of us were crying. But this time they were good tears, healing tears. Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Catherine asked hesitantly. "Nothing fancy, just dinner, just us." I smiled, genuinely smiled. "I'd love that, sweetheart. I'd really love that." A year after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from David, forwarded through his attorney. He was seeking bankruptcy protection. Apparently his business ventures without access to my money hadn't gone well. He was asking if I'd consider helping him financially, for Catherine's sake. I wrote back personally, a brief note. "David, I wish you well in rebuilding your life, but my obligation to support you ended the day you tried to have me declared incompetent. I hope you find success on your own merits. Elizabeth. Catherine's response when I told her about it was telling. Good, she said firmly. He needs to learn what you and Dad tried to teach me. That money you haven't earned is money you don't deserve, money you can't appreciate. We were having dinner at my cottage by the ocean, a small place I'd bought with my own money, decorated with my own taste. Nothing like the mansion James and I had shared, but it was mine. Truly mine. How's the paralegal program? I asked, serving the pot roast I'd made. The same recipe Catherine had once mocked as peasant food. Exhausting, challenging. Amazing, she said, helping herself to vegetables. I'm learning so much, Mom, and I actually understand now what you gave up when you left law to raise me. I didn't give it up, Catherine. I chose you, and I'd make the same choice again. But you're practicing again now. You found your way back. I looked out at the ocean through my window, waves rolling in endlessly, constantly. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find ourselves again. Sometimes the path circles back around. Catherine smiled. That sounds like something Grandpa would have said. Your father was a wise man. He knew exactly what he was doing with that will. Teaching me a lesson I desperately needed to learn and trusting me to guide you through it, even if it meant letting you fall first. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, just being together, no pretense, no performance. Mom, can I ask you something? Anything, sweetheart. In that courtroom, when you revealed who you really were, how did it feel? I thought about it carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer. Terrifying, liberating, powerful. For 35 years, I'd been hiding such a huge part of myself, diminishing myself to make others comfortable. Taking off that mask. It felt like finally breathing again after holding my breath for decades. Do you regret the years you spent hiding? No, I said without hesitation. Those years gave me you, gave me a marriage I treasured, gave me perspective I never would have had otherwise. I don't regret them, but I'm glad they're over. Glad I don't have to pretend anymore. Catherine reached across the table and took my hand. I'm glad too, Mom. I like knowing all of you. Not just the parts you thought I could handle. 2 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at Columbia Law School, my alma mater. The topic was women in law, then and now. I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of young faces, mostly women, all eager, all ambitious, all brilliant. In 1984, I graduated at the top of my class from this law school. I was offered positions at prestigious firms, celebrated as one of the brightest young attorneys in the city. And then I walked away. I got married, had a child, and became invisible. I paused, letting that word hang in the air. For 35 years, I let people underestimate me. I pretended to be less intelligent, less capable, less everything than I actually was. I told myself I was choosing family over career, and in many ways I was. But I was also hiding, protecting myself from judgment, from criticism, from the exhausting work of constantly proving myself in a world that didn't want to see me as both mother and attorney. The room was completely silent, attentive. 2 years ago, my daughter sued me, claimed I was mentally incompetent. And standing in that courtroom, I had a choice. I could continue hiding, or I could finally, after decades, show them who I really was. I smiled, remembering that moment, that glorious, terrifying moment. I chose truth. I chose myself. And it changed everything. After the speech, a young woman approached me, maybe 25, wearing a sharp suit, carrying a leather portfolio. Mrs. Morgan, that was incredible. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret waiting so long? Do you wish you'd fought to have both career and family from the beginning? I thought about her question. Really thought about it. No, I said honestly, because the woman I am now, the attorney I am now, is shaped by every year I spent as just mom. I understand my clients in ways I never could have at 25. I fight for them with a fierceness born from being underestimated myself. My hiding years weren't wasted. They were preparation. She smiled, looking relieved. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Walking back to my car through the campus, I thought about everything that had changed. Everything I'd lost and found and reclaimed. I'd lost my marriage. But James and I had 42 beautiful years before he died. I'd lost my daughter. but we were slowly, carefully rebuilding something stronger, more honest. I'd lost years of my career, but I'd gained wisdom, perspective, purpose, and I'd found myself again. Not the young attorney I'd been, but someone better, deeper, more complete. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Good luck with your speech, Mom. I'm so proud of you. Love you." I smiled, typing back quickly. "Thank you, sweetheart. Dinner this weekend? My place? Absolutely. I'll bring dessert." Driving home along the coast, windows down, ocean breeze in my hair, I thought about that courtroom. The moment everything changed, the moment I stopped hiding. They had laughed when I walked in, dismissed me, underestimated me, assumed I was weak. They had no idea they were facing Elizabeth Thompson Morgan, attorney, mother, survivor, fighter, and I had absolutely no regrets. Not about any of it. The waves crashed against the shore as I pulled into my driveway. Inside, law books waited on my desk, cases to review, clients to help, battles to fight. But also, photographs of Catherine, memories of James, evidence of a life fully lived in all its complexity. I wasn't just mom anymore, wasn't just the attorney anymore, wasn't just anything simple or easy to categorize. I was all of it. Every part, every contradiction, every choice and consequence. And finally, after so many years, I was exactly who I was supposed to be, completely, unapologetically, powerfully myself. And that was worth everything.